Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
So I am doing a message today. It's called The Mystic Jesus. And see, people are leaving already as soon as I say Jesus. I'm just teasing. I love you, Carol. You know I do. I just took you as an opportunity to tease. So part of my job, and you may not know this, but part of my job is to comfort the afflicted. And the other part is to afflict the comfortable. So the message today, and I've taken this title from Marianne Williamson's latest book, and she is a deep student and teacher of A Course in Miracles, and but she grew up just a nice Jewish girl here in Houston, and so she talks about having this sort of insider-outsider relationship with Jesus of Nazareth, and I find it to be really refreshing. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity. So you may think you got Jesus all figured out, or you may think you got no use for Jesus anymore. Stay tuned. Let's see what happens. But first, a joke. And this is it's a repeat. Every once in a while, I just have a joke I like enough, I'm going to do it a second time. This is one of those. A man was stranded on a desert island for many, many years, and finally one day a ship came close enough to see his SOS sign, and as the sailors were coming in to rescue him, everyone was overjoyed that he had survived, and one of the sailors noticed that he had 3 huts that he had built on this tiny island. And the sailor said, I just have to ask, what are those 3 huts? And the man who had been stranded said, well, this is my house, and this is my church. Yeah, but what's the other one? He's like, oh, that's where I used to go to church. How many of you used to go to church somewhere else? Okay, most of you did, yeah. So I've changed churches a couple of times, too. Some of you may want to change churches after today's message. I don't know. But there is something in us that we do need to be comforted, and we also need to be challenged. As a matter of fact, Sanford, I can't remember his name right now, but he created it's just a principle in the world of education that what's necessary for growth are both challenge and support. And so I'm going to try to give both of those today. I want to challenge you if this topic is difficult, and I want to support you if this topic is difficult. And he also said a third thing later in his career. He said there's actually a third thing required too, and it's readiness. That's what's required for growth. Challenge, support, and readiness. So I've got 3 points, so you know I do. 3 points. No poem today, so I'm sorry to let you down on that one. But first, we're talking about the mystic Jesus, so I wanted to explain what mysticism is. How many of you thought it was something kind of spooky and weird? I did. I grew up fundamentalist Christian, and so mysticism was something we didn't want anything to do with. Well, I actually went to ChatGPT. I've been urged to use AI to write my sermons. And I was like, well, I don't know about writing my sermons. To help me with research, I can do that. So here are some key points on mysticism. The first and primary point of the mystical experience, it's a direct experience of the divine. Mystics seek union, communion, or a deep connection to God. The second is universality, not exclusivity. Mystical traditions exist across all religions: Sufism and Islam, Kabbalah and Judaism, Christian mysticism, Advaita Vedanta and Bhakti in Hinduism, and Buddhist is a mystic tradition as well. There's Taoist mysticism, and there are even non-religious earth-based mystics. It's beyond language, this direct experience of the divine. People can write about it and talk about it, but it can never fully capture this direct experience of God. The word is ineffable. Isn't that interesting? I like that. I never knew what that word really meant. It means beyond words. There are practices common to mystical traditions. They include meditation and prayer, fasting, chanting, solitude, rituals meant to quiet the ego and open the awareness to the transcendent reality. And the goal of mysticism is personal transformation of consciousness, of our perception, of our being. Many mystics describe it as a union with God. I was thinking when we were singing the song earlier, Thrive, and it's like, we lift your name on high. Which name is that? God is the word that I use most often, but I know that's problematic for some, and it's not the whole thing, but I've taken this from my dear friend, the late, great Reverend Michael Dowd, who said, I call it God because that's the biggest word I know. It's bigger than any name. And I also often, when I'm having this conversation with you, I talk about Pittman McGehee, who's an Episcopal priest and a Jungian analyst, and he says we need lots of images for God. We're never going to find a single image or a single name that captures the infinite, right? Because it has no edges. How are we going to get completely around it? But it doesn't mean that God is unknowable. We often use the word mystery, which is related to mystic. That God is beyond our ability to fully describe or fully know or fully embody ourselves. But that doesn't mean that it's unknowable. What it means is that it's infinitely knowable. That we're invited into a path of growth and deepening this connection with the infinite reality that I call God, because that's the biggest word I know. And if that word, every time I use it, triggers you, just know that whatever God did you dirty, I'm not talking about him. When I first came into recovery and I was told that I probably might need to fire the God I came with, I thought that was blasphemy. And now I see it as great wisdom, because it was just a human concept that I had been handed for sure, but I embellished. God was even meaner than the fundamentalist church I grew up in said it was. My God really was mean and didn't like me very much when I wasn't doing it right. So more on that later. I'm going to share some of my personal testimony, as Siobhan talked about, but a little bit later. So there's an interesting thing I've noticed in my studies of mysticism. I've said this before too, that the mystics of all the different faith traditions agree that there is only one power and one presence, and a beautiful name for this presence is love. This is what the ultimate reality is. When I first came into this teaching, I did not get it, because I was used to being told how wrong I was, and I better shape up or I'd go someplace hot, and not Houston. Yeah. And so I didn't understand the teaching, but I was a musician, and I wanted to write songs, so I was asking my minister at the time, Reverend Claudia Franklin, said, can you just tell me what I could write about? And she said, well, Michael, what we really teach is that it's all love. And a couple weeks later, I wrote that song, There Is Only Love, which we sang on the cruise with Karen Drucker and Gary Floyd. So what I've come to understand is that fundamentalists of all traditions disagree with everybody else. That like they have this, we've got it all wrapped up, we know all the right rules to follow, we know the correct name for God, and if you're not doing it like us, you're wrong and you're outside, you're excluded from the circle of God. And that is not just in Christianity, that is in every faith tradition. There are fundamentalists who say this is the only way to get to God. They all disagree with each other, but the mystics of every tradition agree with each other. God is never excluding anyone because we are its own expressions. So I was thinking about this, and I said this in my Friday Live. I do a Friday Facebook Live at 12:30 on Fridays if you're on Facebook. There are mystics and mystical lineages and teachings and practice in every religion. In dualistic religions, mystics are usually thought of as either very unique and special, like holy men and women that we could never hope to attain that kind of holiness ourselves. That's the way mystics are viewed, or they're viewed as crazy people you want to avoid. Yeah, so that got some applause. I don't know what that's about, but I like it. I like it. But then in the non-dualistic traditions, mystics are actually seen as way showers. Because the mystics in those traditions are not saying, I'm the only one that's got this. What they're saying is, this is reality. And when they invite you to follow them, they're saying, come this way. And you too can have this intimate, personal, direct connection to God, to Spirit, to the universe. We are a non-dual tradition that exists largely within a dualistic tradition called Christianity. But I love that we occupy this space where I say we are sort of at this crossroads where we also have a door open to the Eastern traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism, because we understand that we don't need any middle person. That's why I think, but it is interesting though, because those traditions are non-dual, but in the Hindu system, the guru is very important. And I think in New Thought, we don't really go for that because we know we can have a direct revelation, a direct experience with God, although teachers are important. And if you have a guru, I'm not talking against you. If you enjoy that guru, it's beautiful. All right. I think I said everything I want to tell you. One more thing about what mysticism is. To be on a mystical path means we have to get rid of our fear of paradox and contradiction, that we are both spirit and human. So we are the perfection of God revealed. Ernest Holmes once wrote, "Humanity is divinity revealed." And I believe that. But there are parts of my life that don't look and sound and feel very divine. Anybody else? Can I testify about that? I struggle. I don't always have centered emotions. And that's just in baseball. I get a little out of shape sometimes. I'm going to confess. It's confessional time. First of all, any New York Yankees fans, I'm just going to apologize before I say this. In my family, the Gotts are big baseball people, and we are split down the middle, and it's over the New York Yankees. We either love them or we don't love them. You can probably guess from my expression which one I'm in. I don't really love the Yankees. And so the Astros played the Yankees this week, and we lost 2 out of 3. Woe was me. But the game we did win, several players and the manager got tossed from the New York Yankees at the end because they were really upset about some of the calls. And I noticed how much joy their upset brought me. And I thought, yeah, I'm still pretty human. So I'm going to work on that, maybe. I feel like sports is the one place I can put all my duality and it's safe there. I'm not going to, if I meet those guys on the street, I will know that God is in them too, I promise. So the next thing I want to talk about is this idea of Jesus as being a way-shower of a mystical tradition. I want to read a little bit from Marianne Williamson from her new book. And on the opening page of the introduction, she says, the way these people usually talk about Jesus of Nazareth, there is the theological stance, which the Christian sort of heterodoxy, the way that people are supposed to think about Jesus as being the Savior of all mankind. There's that side of knowing about Jesus, what he meant, what his sacrifice meant, what his teachings mean. How do I want to say this? I want to say it by a quote from Gandhi. Gandhi said, "I love your Christ. I'm not crazy about your Christians." Most people don't have a problem with Jesus of Nazareth. It's the religion that got formed after he was here on earth around his name and his teachings. That's the problem. And so what I want to start here is by saying that the 2 ways that people have generally talked about Jesus, there's a historic rabbi who lived in the Middle East over 2,000 years ago, and there is evidence that this person was real and existed, and his teachings transformed the people that he ministered to in person, in life, and grew into a new movement, first as a sect of Judaism, and then as its own religion, which is now the largest religion on the planet. Jesus of Nazareth was a real human being. And then there's this theology. And what Marianne Williamson says, I don't want to do either of those things. She said, first of all, I'm not a Christian theologian, and second, I'm not a Christian. But she talks about having a deep relationship with Jesus because of the Course in Miracles. She came here to get spiritual counseling during her dark night of the soul with Reverend Howard's predecessor, Sig Paulson, who was able to counsel her. And she had been kind of out traveling, and she tells this story a lot. She may tell it the Friday that she's here, but she was really kind of lost. But she had begun to study the Course in Miracles, and she was beginning to get some insight into it. But, it uses a lot of Christian language, and she was really uncomfortable with some of the terms in it. But then her mom said, we've really got to get you to see a shrink. We're going to find you a good Jewish psychiatrist here in Houston. And so Marianne agreed, and she went to his office. First thing she said, I know my mother set this up, but here's the thing. I'm a student of A Course in Miracles, and if you're going to dismiss that or tell me that it's wrong, we can't go any further. And he leaned over and he said, I just finished the workbook. And so and she credits this psychiatrist as being a huge healer in her life, but they shared a common language, which is Jesus in A Course in Miracles. So here's what Marianne Williams says. My interest in Jesus has never included a desire to convert to the Christian religion. a fact natural enough to me, but that had to be required to be explained to my parents. When I first became a student of the course, they were understandably perplexed. I remember my mother saying to me, haltingly, "So, help me understand. You're going to stay in California and give talks about Jesus to Gentiles?" Marianne says, I slowly nodded. After a few seconds, she simply shook her head, raised an eyebrow, and asked me, what are you going to wear? I love that. But here's what Marianne describes why she's writing this book. The mystic Jesus is a path of consciousness, an understanding of how the universe operates and how we can mentally align with its purposes. The contemporary mystic is guided by an internal radar that exists within us all, literally a gift from God. Whether we call that guidance conscience, ethics, or covenant with God, the voice of the Holy Spirit, or Jesus, its wisdom and illumination is the salvation of the world. Isn't that beautiful? So if you don't have the book, and work is interesting to you, I highly recommend it. It's Marianne Williamson's newest book, The Mystic Jesus. The Mind of Love is the subtitle. I want to share with you, I shared this story quite a bit. This comes from another book that was really helpful because what I realized is that I did not have a great relationship with the religion that came around Jesus, but I also did need to reframe who and what I thought Jesus was because I had been handed a version of Jesus, and I knew that Jesus did not exclude people because they were gay or because they weren't Christian or because they had any differences. That didn't ring true. But that's what I had been taught. You had to get in the club by saying the sinner's prayer. That's the only way you could be in relationship with God. That was the version of Jesus that I was given. There's a passage in John, chapter 14, verse 6, which was always lauded. It's like, this is the proof that there's no way to God except through Jesus. You may know this. The Gospel of John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In his book, Reading the Bible Again for the First Time, Marcus Borg talks about this. So this same point is made in a story I once heard about a sermon preached by a Hindu professor in a Christian seminary. The text for the day included this one-way passage. And about it, he said, this verse is absolutely true. Jesus is the only way. But then he went on to say, and that way of dying to an old way of being and being born again into a new way of being is known in all of the religions of the world. The way of Jesus is the universal way, known to millions who have never heard of Jesus. And that gave me freedom, that I began to understand that it wasn't saying the right prayer so I can get into the right club so I wouldn't go to the hot place. It wasn't that at all. That what this passage was saying was this way, this path of consciousness, as Marianne says, this is a universal way of spiritual healing and transformation. That we must die to the lesser. We must die to the ego-driven, self-centered way that we've been and find the deeper, truer self that was who we were all along anyway. We're expressions of God's light. And that transformation, that revelation, that becoming takes time and it takes intention. And Jesus' path shows us the way to do it. Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, he said this, Christ is the divine man. Jesus is the name that represents an individual expression of the Christ idea. Christ existed long before Jesus was born. It was the Christ mind in Jesus that exclaimed, and now, Father, glorify me with thine own self, with the glory which I had before the world was. Christ abides in each person as his or her potential perfection. Isn't that beautiful? I always thought Christ was Jesus' last name. Didn't you think that? It's the Greek word Christos, which means anointed one, often translated as Messiah. What if that were your last name? What if that were just that potential? You know, in Unity, the founders of our movement, they talked about Jesus not being as our Savior, but as being an elder brother, as a way shower. Myrtle had a deep and loving relationship with Jesus of Nazareth. As she was in the process of healing her own body, using this technique we use called affirmative prayer, she would sit in a chair opposite her, she would have a picture of Jesus. And she would do this spiritual work, feeling the loving support of this way shower, this friend, this guide that is Jesus. All right. So you ready for me to read the Bible? Before I do, I mentioned afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted, didn't I? This came to me, and I don't normally write things down, but I did write this down. So this is Michael Gott speaking. I find that some people, when they're hearing or reading directly from the Bible, they're comforted, and some are triggered. To those who are comforted, I would say this: listen again. Try to hear something new in this reading, and maybe even something that challenges your worldview. And to those who are triggered, I would say, listen again. Try not to hear this through the ears of the child that was shamed or abused in that religion. There is a truth and a beauty here that has stood the test of time and has even stood the test of religious abuse. So let us listen to the words of Jesus. And actually, these aren't the words of Jesus. It's the Gospel of John. This is Gospel of John. I said it 3 times. Gospel of John. This is one of the healing stories. This is not one of the teaching stories or the parables. This comes from chapter 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus said, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God may be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work, and while I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This means sent. So the man went, he was sent, and he went and washed, and he came home seeing. And his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" And some claimed that he was, and others said, "No, he just looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am that man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. And he replied, "The man named Jesus made some mud and put it in my eyes, and he told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and now I can see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. I get chills reading that story. I'm going to hopefully offer you some insight into what it means for me, and maybe it will give some light for you. I love that it ends with the question, well, where is this guy? I don't know. To me, it's like a strange little thing that somehow got into the Bible that points to this idea of this direct experience of the divine is not something we can hold on to and name and go, there it is. It's an experience. This man had an experience with Jesus. I also want to say, I also didn't realize, I've been saying this for years, I didn't realize it was actually in Marcus Borg's book, that the Native American storytellers would sometimes say, "I don't know if any of this happened, but I know it's true." This gospel was written at least 75 years after Jesus had died. So we don't know that there was anyone there with their phone, on the camera on the phone recording it, probably not. So we don't know that it happened. We do know there are lots of instances of people being reported to have had physical healings under Jesus' ministry. And several of them were blind people who then could see. The thing that is so interesting about this story is the way it begins by the disciples saying, "Whose fault is this?" Do you ever do that? There's a problem here. Who's to blame? The Democrats, obviously. Or the Republicans, obviously. Who do I blame? We do this. When we have a problem in our life, we look for someone to blame or something to blame. It was my messed up childhood. I almost said a bad word again. I've been good about that. I caught it. We look for some place where we can say, this is why this is like this, pointing the finger to judge. And Jesus said, no, that's not what this is. In the King James, it says, this is that the glory of God may be revealed. That is a powerful statement. What if your challenges and my challenges were not because we did anything wrong or because the world is messed up or because our parents did anything wrong, because it's an opportunity for us to show the Christ within ourselves. That our healing becomes an opportunity to reveal the reality of God in and as our lives. What if it's that? And I know you're thinking about your current challenge right now. Well, not this one. Michael, you don't know. It really is my mother's fault. It's not this one, I promise. What if it's not because of the sins of you or anyone else, but this condition that you are currently dealing with, that you are currently facing, is an invitation for the glory of God to be revealed? What does that mean? It kind of changes our attitude about it, doesn't it? If nothing else, it's just a tiny opening. What if? What if this doesn't define me? This is the path of what frees me. What if? And simply holding that possibility in mind begins to reveal the Christ path. Simply holding that possibility. I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm going to keep walking. I'm going to keep going to that weird church. I'm going to keep going to those stupid recovery meetings. I'm going to keep listening to that therapist who doesn't know what they're doing. I'm just going to stay on the path. I'm going to keep doing the deal with this intention that healing is here for me, with intention that I will be able to see the truth in a different way. I think it's interesting that this man was blind from birth. And I don't quite know the metaphysics of saliva and mud, and I didn't look it up in Charles Fillmore. But for me, there's something just very earthy about that. If Jesus was some ascended master, would he have spit? If anybody watched the Cowboys game on Thursday, that's a whole other thing, but it's such a human thing, isn't it? But there's something about using the elements of earth and water, maybe. Something here, something so earthy as being a way of finding healing, of finding a way that I can see this differently. That as earthy as a dumb recovery meeting, as earthy as going to a church where people are so, those ministers are so human at Unity of Houston. Oh my gosh. They don't have it figured all out, I promise you. I can't even talk straight today. We find the revelation of our wholeness through the earthly means, as every day as spit and mud. I think it's interesting that the story says he was sent to the pool called Siloam, which literally means sent. There was something else he had to do. There was a path that he had to take. There was a place that he was guided to go. How many of you know that you have a part of your own mind that is open to the infinite wisdom of the universe? It's called your intuition. I have been leaning into it hard lately. My mentor and teacher, Reverend Dr. Petra Weldes, she told us, and this is in a seminary class years ago, she said, in all my years on this path, I have never once regretted not following my intuition. I've never once regretted following my intuition, but many times I have regretted not following my intuition. And you can tell which is your intuition and which is the voice of your fear or your egoic desire, or at least I can. I've learned to just sit and be still, and if the thought of this direction or this guidance expands me, I know that I've tapped into the infinite side of my being. And I follow it. And it's not always easily apparent why I do that, but I know that I am being called. I'm sent by my internal guidance system. And this man was sent, and he washed. And he could see his life differently. And he said, I am still that person that was this, but now I can see. Was blind, but now I see. I don't know what it is that's asking for that from you today. But I invite you to open your intention, open your possibility, listen deeply. Because there is some place that we are all blind to our truth and to the great reality of God around us and within us. And if we are willing to follow that guidance and direction, keep doing those earthy, dumb things, and we will see differently. And that feels like the end of my sermon, but I have one more thing to say. I'm going to close with a little bit more about my personal relationship with Jesus of Nazareth. When I was in the deepest, darkest part of my dark night of the soul in my 20s, deeply depressed and treating that depression with a depressant called alcohol, one night I was awake at about 3 a.m, drinking wine. I don't know, my roommates were gone. I was just watching TV in the living room, drunk and drinking. And the only thing on TV was Bill Gaither's Homecoming. And Cynthia Clausen, and there was all these great old gospel singers, and Cynthia Clausen, who still lives right here in Houston, it got quiet, and it was a cappella, and she just sang, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." And it touched me, and I wept. Everyone on that screen was weeping. I could feel the beauty of their own connection to Jesus. The next morning, I called my parents and said, I'm not in a great shape, and I need to come home. And I did for a while, and I realized that wasn't the answer. I thought, and watching that video with, I remember Vestal Goodman. If you don't know Southern Gospel, oh my gosh. She always sang with a hanky, a big gal, and she just had, I called her the Ethel Merman of gospel music. She was just weeping. And I was watching all these people, and I realized I want to belong like I used to in that world, and I don't anymore. What that meant for me was that it just set me on a journey of trying to find my own way of understanding Jesus as guide and friend. A couple of years later, I was invited to come sing at some weird church in Dallas, and I kept going back because they kept paying me. And when Howard invited me to come here and work with him at Unity of Houston, I thought this will be an opportunity for me to explore my relationship not only with Jesus, but with Christianity. And it's been such a healing journey, these 14 years. And I stand before you today, and I just tell you, I love Jesus deeply. But Jesus is not what Jesus used to be. I love what Marianne said, a path of spiritual becoming, of consciousness being revealed. Today, I have gone where I was sent, and I can see. God bless you. Let's pray. Thank you. Let's pray. So just taking a moment to recognize that the light of the Christ is in all of us. Before Jesus was ever born in a manger, that light of this path to the one, the path to the divine has always been available to us. But in this moment, I bless Jesus of Nazareth. Thank you, Jesus, for being in my life and this offering your hand to guide. So what I know is that each of us is called and sent to the place where we will find our vision and find our freedom. And I trust that everyone within the sound of my voice begins to step onto their own path of the Christ, revealing and healing every day. And there is a homecoming. We come home to ourselves, to our true nature, where we were always enough. We've always been good enough, strong enough. free enough. And we accept that and we bless it. So we give thanks and we let it be, and so it is. Amen. If no one has told you today that they love you, I love you. Thank you.
For watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.